you, everyone. The title of my talk this evening is The Good, the Mad and the Magyar, Hungarian Recorded Music, 1889 to 1918. And through the use of this wording, Hungarian recorded music, I want us to explore two aspects of this topic. Both the recorded music created and consumed within the Kingdom of Hungary in these years, but also period recordings of specifically Hungarian music. It's not unfair to say that Hungarian music occupied a special, or rather unusual place in late 19th and early 20th century's musical culture. Throughout the late Victorian period, musicians and music critics raved about the nature of the music of Hungary. On the one hand, they enthused about its beauty and its wondrous harmonies, heretofore not seen in Western art music. On the other, these same qualities were thought to be so unnaturally bewitching that they were linked with Victorian ideas of mental illness, depravity, and the conjuration of dangerous feelings. The noted American music critic Edward Stevenson went so far as to say that no music seems as directly sensual as the Magyar, wonderfully beautiful in its rhythms, melodies, and harmonies. But Count Erich Stenbock, in a short story of 1894, called it the music which makes men mad. These were two sides of the same medal, but nor has this perception gone away in more recent times. Contemporary reviewers have described the classical music of the Hungarian Belle-époque, who we shall be considering later, as anxious, hypnotic, and intellectually exhausting. What was it about specifically Hungarian music that so caught the 19th century imagination? And is any of this strange and curious mystery captured on both types of this Hungarian recorded music? From the gypsy orchestras of the Budapest cafes to the military bands of the Habsburg Empire, and from the peasant folk songs of the rustic villages to the latest operettas in the grand theatres, what can recordings tell us about Hungarian musical culture in this period? And what did truly Hungarian music even sound like? I would like to begin my exploration of Hungarian recorded music this evening with almost a side note on the first record made in the Hungarian language. This will allow us not only to meet and hear one of Hungarian history's great men, but also it will allow me to explain a little about the political and social historical context of Hungary, and so of its recorded music. In 1848, a wave of revolutions, one of the waves of which history is chiefly composed, swept through Europe, including the Kingdom of Hungary. There, the revolution broke out into open warfare after the new Austrian emperor, yet to be crowned as King of Hungary, Franz Joseph I, illegally reversed a Hungarian law enacting democratic parliamentary elections. It was Lajos Kossuth, or according to Hungarian surname first naming convention, Kossuth Lajos, who emerged as governor-president of the rebel Hungary. We see him there on the far left in 1852, and also then in much later life. By October 1849, the revolution had failed. Martial law was imposed directly from Austria. 13 rebel generals were executed at Arad in modern Romania, and Kossuth fled into exile. The situation was not fully resolved until the infamous compromise, or Ausgleich, of 1867, under which the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary was established. Franz Joseph was crowned King of Hungary, and the kingdom, together with the Hungarian parliament, was allowed autonomy. Kossuth, meanwhile, after successful pro-Hungarian speaking tours of America and Britain, went into permanent exile in Turin, remaining there until his death in 1894. It was there, on the 20th of September 1890, that two men, Tivadar Barna and Karoly Fellner, visited him with a phonograph, and persuaded him to make a voice recording on the occasion of a dedication of a memorial to those executed generals in Arad, seen there on the right. It should be mentioned I have no idea how they got hold of a phonograph in 1890, as officially and legally they shouldn't have been able to. The record of Kossuth's voice was subsequently exhibited widely in Hungary, from 1890 until at least 1896. Let's listen to an excerpt from the Kossuth cylinders, seen bottom left in their luxurious protective cases. It's worth bearing in mind that in his time, Kossuth was known as a superb orator. The American music critic Edward Stevenson wrote in 1902 of the emotional effect of climaxes of oratory from a voice almost incomparable as to its melodiousness and dramatic fire. Let's hear Kossuth speaking in Hungarian on the subject of the Arad Memorial, although frequent playing has sadly diminished the quality of this record considerably. Having explained the historical context in Hungary, and heard from a man who did more than most to shape its destiny, let us now turn towards its music. Here is the picture that greeted prospective buyers of gramophone discs in the elegant British catalogue of the Gramophone Company in 1898. This, in common with Western European and American imagination of the time, is a very stereotypical and rather one-dimensional view of music in Hungary. A place of decided positive primitivism, populated as here by rejoicing peasants, where, quote, sentimental eloquence is always lurking in the blood. But to what extent does the recorded music of Hungary bear this out? If we were to select some of the Hungarian offerings in catalogues from British or American companies, well, we might find them slightly lacking. Let's hear an example of what the Edison Bell Phonograph Company in this country thought was representative of Hungarian music in their catalogue. Franz Liszt's Second Hungarian Rhapsody, originally composed for piano, but here played by the Royal Military Band on Edison Bell black wax cylinder in 1906.
Second Rhapsody, Liszt, played by the Royal Military Band, Edison Bell Record.
whilst technically a good record, and with excellent balancing of the instruments, it is an excessively metronomic performance, and one I think lacking in much dynamism or passion. Already, we're getting a rather distorted and sanitised view of recorded Hungarian music. But was this always the case? To find out, let us go right back to the beginning, with the first records of Hungarian music ever made in 1889. Now, the earliest reference I could find to Hungarian music being recorded was in the Albany Argus newspaper of the 24th of July 1889, when a large gathering assembled in a grand hotel in that town in America to witness public musical recording demonstrations on Edison's new perfected phonograph. Included in the ensembles performing that evening was Erdeli Nach's Gypsy Orchestra from the Eden Musée in New York. Naturally, any records that were made do not exist today. However, for some records that do survive, we must turn to this man, seen there on the right. During his European tour with the phonograph in 1889-90, Edison's representative, Adalbert Theodor Wangerman, came to Vienna. There, in October and November 1889, he made records of, among others, the pianist Alfred Grunfeld. To see what the recording event looked like, on the left is a cut from a continental journal of around the same date. Although often derided as inaccurate, this picture was almost certainly sketched from life during one of Wangerman's piano recording sessions. He did indeed use this curiously angled horn, and interestingly, it can be seen before its use by him in a photograph of the Edison exhibit at the Exposition Universelle in Paris in 1889. Here then is an excerpt of one of those recordings Wangerman made, Grunfeld playing a selection of his own composition, A Hungarian Rhapsody, on the 18th of November 1889. Admittedly, this is not the best recording, even if the piano does come through quite well. Fortunately, Grunfeld re-recorded this piece on Berliner disc around 1898, so we can appreciate the full work more clearly, as it was meant to be heard. Grunfeld was a very accomplished pianist, and this is a dynamic, vivacious and thrilling performance. however, with these records. We've only seen Hungarian music through one lens, that of classical music. The composer takes themes, motifs, and other musical elements from the traditional music of the Hungarian peoples and weaves that into a piece of classical music in the Western tradition. So many conventions are applied that it becomes, it could be said, only Hungarian in a rather remote and detached sense. After all, to what extent is a piece, as here, written by a non-Hungarian composer and performed, recorded and sold in other countries, actually Hungarian music? The question is, therefore, can we discover any other truly Hungarian music on record? What did Hungarian music sound like at the dawn of sound recording? And what, if any of it, was being recorded for consumption in Hungary itself? I suspect to answer this question, we must leave the shores of Britain and America, where these records, like Grunfeld's, were being produced and sold. Let us therefore take a trip to Hungary, to the capital city Budapest, at the dawn of the 20th century. Here is a real colour autochrome photograph of Budapest, taken in 1913. What sorts of music, both live and recorded, might we hear if we were to journey to Budapest around or slightly before this date? Now, no fin de siècle continental traveller went anywhere without his Baedeker guidebook, so why not consult it and discover what music might be on offer? The Elizabeth Square, with a cafe where a military band plays thrice weekly in summer. Well, here is the so-called kiosk cafe where that band played in the Erzsébet or Elizabeth Square, one of the principal garden squares in central Budapest in the 1900s. If this is a kiosk, I can only say that kiosks have gone considerably downhill in the last 120 years. Here might be heard excerpts from the latest operettas in Berlin or Vienna, or popular waltzes and other light dance music. Here then are two examples of the sort of light music or popular orchestral dance music that might have been enjoyed both on record at home and live in the city parks, as well as a good example of the pervasiveness of Germanic taste from Berlin and Vienna. Our first is the Frau Luna waltz from Paul Linker's popular Berlin operetta Frau Luna, first produced in 1899. This is here played by an unidentified band on an unidentified 10-inch test pressing, but recorded somewhere within Germanic Central Europe around 1910. second record, then, is the Blumen Polka, or Flowers Polka, recorded on gramophone concert record by the Royal Saxon 105th Infantry Regiment in Germany, but the record was sold in Hungary in 1902. Too refined and high class for our tastes. Perhaps to get a true picture of Budapestian musical life, we want to hear and experience the sort of music that the man on the street might enjoy. We want something a little closer to the real people of the city, something perhaps a little more popular, a little earthier. What sort of music might these people have enjoyed listening to on their gramophone? Well, the second category of recorded music that from my researches appears to have been especially popular in Hungary at this date is the popular art song. More often than not, suffused with a sense of deep melancholy, nostalgia and lamentation, in a style then as now beloved in all of Eastern Europe. If the numbers of surviving records of these songs in present-day archives is anything to go by, they were very popular and widely sold. And as representative, therefore, of this type of music, let's listen to an example. The song Zep volt mint ege alom, or It Was Beautiful Like a Dream, as sung here by Kari Ulvari and recorded on the Favorit record label in 1917.
wonder what the chap on the extreme right was doing? He was about to hit something.
I haven't a clue. I'm not sure whether he's beating time on
He's
that
got a
beer
bottle,
bottle.
a large bottle in his hand.
Not a clue, I'm afraid. Now, no discussion of Hungarian recorded music is complete without reference to this label. Indeed, record production in Hungary itself is usually dated from 1908, when Peter Csongor established the első Magyar Hangulmezgyár, or Premier Hungarian Record Factory. Csongor wished to create explicitly a domestic, national and Hungarian-owned and based gramophone and recording industry, and saw his company as the pioneer in that regard. When it was first established, they also took over the masters and production of some other smaller European companies, such as the Meteor Record Company. Sometimes, as can be seen here, the discs were labelled with the name of the company, and sometimes with the rough English equivalent, Premier Record. As you can see, the very attractive label art also explicitly positions the company as thoroughly Hungarian in character. To complete our look at more popular styles of music, and as a relatively rare example of a truly joyful tune, let's hear the disc on the right, an instrumental record of a czardash, or rustic dance, a medley entitled Borna Legini Vagyok, or For I Am a Bronzed Lad. This was recorded around 1910 on Premier Record by Nando Chovanka's Gypsy Band. Now, the third type of recorded music, which was especially popular in this, at the time, a highly militaristic nation, was, of course, military music. As representative of this, therefore, let's listen to our next record, a descriptive specialty. This is A Dizorsheg Lavaltasha Budan, or The Changing of the Guard in Buda, a descriptive march medley, here played by an unknown military band around 1910. This is a Columbia record, but here it was overpasted and sold in Hungary with the label of Wagner Hangsa Kirai, or the Wagner Royal Musical Instrument Store. Here is also featured the Austrian national anthem, and so by extension that of the wider Austro-Hungarian Empire, with a melody identical to Deutschland über alles. In an empire so unstable and fraught with varying nationalist sympathies, even music could become political. In 1903, a crisis of control arose between the Hungarian parliament and the Hofburg in Vienna. The details are complex, but relations quickly deteriorated until popular feeling against Austria grew so great on the streets of Budapest that, as Edward Stevenson tells us, one could not even whistle the Austrian hymn without rebuke, nor ask a question in German of an official without the risk of being insulted. The Austrian hymn was, of course, the Austrian national anthem we've just heard, but I doubt whether our next record would have met with any more favourable response. The Hof-Habsburg March, or Up the Habsburgs, was the personal anthem of the Habsburg family, for several centuries one of the foremost ruling houses of Europe, and whose head was the aforementioned Emperor of Austria and Apostolic King of Hungary, Francis Joseph I. Hof Habsburg was thoroughly Austrian in character, and whilst it may have been played when the king visited Budapest, I doubt it would have met with a pleasant reception during that 1903 period of political turmoil. Let's now listen to the Hof Habsburg March on a Spezia record of around 1910, played by the Spezia Orchestra. I think the cymbal player deserves an award for enthusiasm here. Well, now I think it's time for our customary break, and I'll leave you with this delightful scene, another real colour autochrome of Budapest, seen here from the banks of the Danube in 1913. Well, I've put this slide in so we can see some of the remarkable label art on these discs that were being produced and sold in Hungary or the wider Austro-Hungarian Empire around this time. What's notable about all these records that we heard just before the break is that in many cases they are the product of the wider Austro-Hungarian Empire and the German-speaking lands in Central Europe. Some were recorded in Budapest, but others were in Berlin, Vienna, Strasbourg and elsewhere. Not to speak of the manufacture. We all know the usual reproduced in Hanover, stamped on G&T records. We can still get the sense then that we're not quite close enough, Hungarian elements are at risk of being diluted or obscured by these Germanic layerings, or deliberately so, for a wider Germanic market. Also, on these discs, much was recorded and sold that was not actually Hungarian music at all. It was Hungarian only by virtue of its existing in Hungary. I've included these to give a good picture of what the musical culture of Budapest and Hungary was like in around 1910. But if we want to focus in our search on what is commonly meant by Hungarian music, we must look somewhere else. Let us try, therefore, the native cylinder recording companies of Budapest and Hungary. One of the most prominent cylinder companies in this era was the Echo Phonograph Társaság, or Echo Phonograph Company. Interestingly, it was co-owned by a married couple, Wenzel and Julia Szalai, who were registered as traders of patented technical articles and echo phonographs. The advertisement on the right, from the Budapesti Napló paper of the 8th December 1903, reads, "We offer our excellent Edison phonograph and our acclaimed artistically recorded cylinders as a nice Christmas and New Year's surprise for every family. We will send you a list of prices and cylinders free of charge." Here are two of those acclaimed artistically recorded brown waxed cylinders. I suspect, due to the extreme clarity of both, that they are individually recorded studio masters, rather than copied or dubbed cylinders. Both that clarity and the fact they are preserved in their original packaging and boxes suggests they have hardly been played since their creation. For information about these records, I'm very grateful for the help of Franz Szabo, who, if you will recall, came to speak to us about Eternola Edison Bell earlier this year. Our first brown wax echo cylinder is sung by a man called Franz Pokorny. Born on the 10th of December 1857, he performed as Pokorny until 1904, when he changed his surname to Tihany, helping us to date this record nicely to either 1903 or 4. Here he is announced as a member of the Royal Hungarian Opera, where he was employed from 1894 until 1925 as a regular chorus member, and also he occasionally sung smaller solo roles. He was also the father of Vilma Tihany, a famous Hungarian soprano of the interwar period. Clearly he supplemented his steady work at the opera with record making, along similar lines to many other pioneer recording artists in America, Britain and Europe at this date. Let's listen to him now on the upper of those two brown wax records, singing what sounds like a comic song, Rip Rip, on Echo Phonograph Company record 449, made in Budapest in 1903 or 4. second of the well-preserved echo records we're going to hear is a tarogato solo, played by Lajos Ola at around the same date. The tarogato is an instrument much used then as now in Hungarian and Romanian folk music. However, the instrument itself is largely a modern creation from the 1890s, when a strident horn-like traditional instrument was completely recreated as a reed woodwind, similar to an oboe or a clarinet, making it more suited to concert recitals. Lajos Ola was a recognised mester, or master, upon the instrument, and made many recordings of his playing over the years, even into the post-1925 electrical period. Here he is playing a popular Hungarian lament, Rákóczi Kesergó, or Rákóczi Lament, on Echo Phonograph Company record 140. Possibly, yes.
That's a clarinet.
Of course, not every cylinder and phonograph company or retailer was making their own original records. The majority of local cylinder purveying companies in Budapest were content to import and rebrand other manufacturers' cylinders as their own. Here we see some examples: Mascagni, Aranifeni and Chelagn-Deckmann. Mascagni was in fact one of, if not the earliest, cylinder company in Budapest, appearing in the directory in 1902, managed by brothers Avram and Leo Schlesinger. Despite the fact that Mascagni even put Eredity Fulvetile, or original recording, on their box labels, the writing and catalogue numbers on the boxes, and often the cylinders still found with them, show that many were actually repackaged Edison and Columbia records. On the right, for example, is an Aranifeni box, but containing, since its sale, Edison gold-moulded 8745, a cornet solo by Bohumir Kryl, recorded in 1904. Aranifeni and Chelagn-Deckmann both began trading in 1904, and also were listed as phonographic cylinder factories, so they may indeed have made some of their own records as well. Their trade was also wider than in merely records. Salomon Csillag and Gyula Dekman were also listed as shop owners selling lighting, heating equipment and technical innovations. Indeed, not every company that sold records was solely committed to that line of business. Many branched out into it, no doubt seeing it as a profitable sideline to their principal concern. This company, Sternberg Armin Eschtechtvere, or Armin Sternberg and Brother, was one of these. They were one of, if not the, foremost musical instrument makers and retailers in Budapest, and boasted of supplying musical instruments to the imperial and royal household. This advert on the left, from the Budapesti Napló of the 8th of December 1903, demonstrates how they advertised talking machines and records alongside their other instruments. Real gramophones from 70 crowns, discs for 3 crowns in bulk and individually, latest artist vocal recordings from members of the Royal Hungarian Opera and other first-rate artists, military and gypsy bands, genuine Edison phonographs from 100 crowns, family phonographs from 20 crowns, cylinders from 2.5 crowns, Intona, Phoenix and Aristone makes from 20 crowns. The fact that the talking machine was a rather late arrival to their business can be really nicely seen by the way that the cut of an Edison gem has been rather awkwardly squeezed in between two figures on the bottom of an already laid out printer's plate for the advert. Armin Sternberg himself took a wider interest in new acoustic technology as well, manufacturing Stroh violins for both presumably recording purposes and also for the many street and cafe bands of the city. Finally, cylinder records could also be enjoyed courtesy of the Pathé Company, one of whose so-called salons was located in Budapest. These were places, as seen on the right, where patrons could lounge in relative comfort and, through ear tubes, listen to selections of their choice played by phonographs worked by staff in the basement below. On the left can be seen a nice example of a surviving metal token for use in the Pathé Salon in Budapest. However, the small independent cylinder record companies can also tell us something further about the nature of recorded music in Budapest. Here is a map of the city, with the cylinder companies indicated by means of the bold red vertical arrows. This is also the reason I have been noting on every slide the various locations of the cylinder companies in Budapest. Clustered down the bottom, we can see from left to right the locations of Arany Feni and Csillag and Dekman, Mascagni, Echo and Sternberg. And up the top we can see the second location of Echo and the Pathé Salon. However, there are 2 other buildings marked on this map. On the left and up the top, the Royal Hungarian Opera House, and on the bottom, on the right, the Népszínház, or Popular Play Theatre. Now, the scholar and musicologist Eva Moreda Rodriguez, who is a colleague of our own Inya Stanovic, has written an excellent article about the early phonograph companies of Spain, entitled Prefiguring the Spanish Recording Diva, How Gabinetes Fonográficos Changed Listening Practices. In that article, she examined the operations of the so-called gabinetes fonográficos, or phonograph emporiums, in several principal Spanish cities at the end of the 19th century. One of the conclusions she draws from her study is especially pertinent here. By examining the locations of these phonograph selling and record producing shops, with relevance to the many theatres in the cities, she saw that some of the emporiums were next door or just across the road from the popular theatres. From this, she interprets that the phonograph shop owners thought that proximity to a popular theatre was desirable for their business, either due to increased footfall all that songs recorded by the artists appearing on stage could be purchased, perhaps as souvenirs of performance. If we look here at Budapest, whilst not identical, a somewhat similar thing seems to be going on. Yes, the companies down at the bottom are gathered together around a principal shopping district, but the theatre is just up a main thoroughfare to the right. And with the Echo Company at the top, the company that did make their own records, it seems to be especially so sited, as one of its locations was directly opposite the Opera House on Andrassy Street. Just to show you what that looked like, here is a photograph of that Andrassy Street from 1896. As you can see, it was a particularly grand monumental street, even being once described as the most palatial street in the whole list of great streets in great capitals. On the left of the photograph can be seen the Royal Hungarian Opera House, and the earlier location of the Echo Company and the Pathé Salon were in the left-hand block in the middle distance with the domed corner tower. We've come a long way here from Grunfeld and Liszt and their classical compositions, but perhaps classical music can tell us one last thing. Indeed, so far we've omitted one matter vitally important in the history of Hungarian recorded music, namely recorded Hungarian folk songs. And so, for the closing chapter of our exploration, let us explore the folk music recordings and compositions of the Hungarian composer Béla Bartók. Bartók, who was active between around 1899 and 1945, was, according to Harold Schoenberg in The Lives of the Great Composers, a nationalist composer. There is scarcely a note of his mature music that is not impregnated with the feeling of the Hungarian melody. If we want to understand fully a traditional and uniquely Hungarian recorded music, we can do little better than explore it both through the ethnomusicological recordings of Bartók and his own compositions themselves. Born of musical parents in Hungary in 1881, Bartók, always keenly feeling nationalist pride, studied music at the Royal Academy in Budapest rather than the Conservatory in Vienna. After finding that the traditional peasant folk songs of Hungary had never been systematically studied, beginning in 1905, he began a collaboration into researching folk music with his colleague Zoltán Kodály, seen there on the right. The following year, Bartók began annual expeditions to record and collect Hungarian folk music by encouraging local singers in villages to sing them into the phonograph, as we see here in this scene with Bartók from around 1908. By 1918, Bartók claimed to have recorded more than 9,000 melodies, not only Hungarian, but also Slovakian, Romanian, Bulgarian, and Serbian. He made plain arrangements of some of these tunes and edited collections of folk songs, but they also inspired him in his classical music compositions. He found his experience of this music transformative as a composer, writing, "It opened the door to the liberation from the former tyranny of the major and minor systems," and said it contained the greatest variety of the most liberated rhythmic patterns. Now, Bartók was not the first person to have an interest in recording and preserving traditional Hungarian music. From 1896, Baedeker took recordings of folk music and presented them to great acclaim at the 1900 Paris Exposition. Kodály himself had actually listened to some himself back at the 1896 Hungarian Millennial Exhibition, where they'd also been exhibited. The combined scholarly ethnographical work and research conducted by Bartók, Kodály, Vikar and others has left an exceptionally rich recorded heritage of traditional Hungarian music and songs. It's estimated that today there are over 6,000 cylinder recordings of folk songs in Hungarian archives. And so to understand Hungarian recorded music, we cannot pass them by. Let's listen to one original example, recorded by Bartók himself in Doboz village in southeastern Hungary in 1906. This short song is called Zep a Pava, or The Peacock is Beautiful. The peacock is beautiful because its feather is golden, but the Marosh's water is more beautiful for its foam. The peacock's feather will yet be sullied, but I and my sweetheart shall still be married. I've put the Hungarian words as well up on the screen so you can follow along with the recording. Here it is, sung by Sophie Vache, aged at the time only 18. What enthralled Bartók about this particular song was its unusual and varied use of rhythm and metre, for when notated, the song must switch rapidly between 4/4, 3/4 and 2/4 time. Bartók sought to gain inspiration from what he called these novel rhythmic possibilities for his own music. But just how did he express and formulate this inspiration in his own music which thus must be indelibly Hungarian in character? To conclude our music for this evening, here is a short excerpt from a modern recording of Bartók's String Quartet No. 3, written in 1927. I've selected that part of the piece which is most readily identified as drawing direct inspiration from Bartók's field recordings of Hungarian folk music. To deepen our appreciation of the music here, I shall refer to this quote from János Kárpáti, the sometime head librarian at the Budapest Academy of Music, who says, "The folk music is noticeable through the use of art music laments, naturalistic sobbing, other sorrowful sound effects, and the monologue tone." Throughout my talk this evening, we've heard some of the earliest recordings of Hungarian-inspired classical music from Grunfeld, and we've listened to a representative sample of the recorded music of Hungary that was popular in this period, both on cylinders and discs, and discovered a little of the history of some of the companies behind them. We've also seen how the cylinder companies' locations across Budapest mirror a curious pattern also seen in Spain, and one suspects perhaps even more widely across Europe at this date, in their siting close to theatres and places of musical entertainment. Lastly, we've heard how the folk music recordings of Bartók preserved a rich and historic Hungarian musical culture and continue to influence more modern classical music. I hope perhaps that in some of the records we've heard this evening, we've experienced some of those mysterious and unusual qualities that so fascinated the musical world of the late 19th century, and can maybe even agree that the music can be wonderfully beautiful in its rhythms, melodies and harmonies, even if hopefully it has not driven any of us to lunacy. As to my talk itself, I do not wish to appear immodest, but I hope very much that you might feel able to concur with Franz Joseph himself by saying, "Es war sehr schön, es hat mich sehr gefreut." It was very nice and we enjoyed it greatly. Thank you for listening.